The elevator doors started closing when Miguel, our night janitor, squeezed inside. He smelled like disinfectant and worry. Without looking at me, he pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my hand and stepped out at the next floor. My heart raced as I unfolded it. The message was written in shaky handwriting. "Don't come to work tomorrow. Run. They know what you found." I stared at the note until the elevator reached my floor. Miguel had worked here for 15 years. He wasn't the type to play jokes or cause drama. His warning felt real, urgent. But what had I found? I worked in accounts payable, processing invoices and payments. Nothing seemed dangerous about my job. Walking to my car, I kept looking over my shoulder. The parking garage felt darker than usual. Every shadow seemed to hide something. I clutched the note tighter, trying to remember anything unusual from the past few days. There had to be a reason Miguel risked his job to warn me. The drive home was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Whatever Miguel knew, it was serious enough to make him afraid. And now, I was afraid too. I sat at my kitchen table, unable to eat dinner. The note lay next to my laptop like a loaded weapon. I opened my work files, searching for anything that might have triggered Miguel's warning. For weeks, I'd been processing payments to new vendors. Most seemed normal: office supplies, cleaning services, maintenance contracts. But now, looking closer, some things felt wrong. 3 vendors had similar addresses. 2 had the same phone number. One company called Premier Solutions had received over $200,000 in the past month, but I couldn't remember what services they provided. I pulled up Premier Solutions invoices. The descriptions were vague: consulting services, administrative support, project management. No details. No proof of actual work. My stomach dropped as I realized what this might mean. Someone was stealing money from the company. And somehow, I'd stumbled onto their scheme. But why warn me to run? Unless they planned to blame me for it. The thought hit me like ice water. I was the one who approved these payments. My digital signature was on every invoice. If someone wanted a scapegoat, I was perfect. I barely slept that night. At dawn, my phone buzzed with text messages from coworkers. "OMG, turn on the news. Federal agents at our building. They're arresting people." My hands trembled as I found a live stream. Black SUVs surrounded our office building. People in FBI jackets carried boxes out the front door. The news reporter spoke into her microphone. "Federal agents are conducting raids at multiple locations in connection with an alleged embezzlement scheme." My phone rang. It was my friend Carla from accounting. "Thank God you're okay," she said. "They're looking for you. They have a warrant with your name on it." The room spun around me. Miguel's warning had saved me from walking into a trap. "What are they saying I did?" I whispered. "Money laundering, fraud. The FBI thinks you've been stealing millions." Carla's voice cracked. "But I know you didn't do this. You're the most honest person I know." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the blank TV screen. Somewhere, someone was using my name and signature to steal money, and the FBI thought I was the mastermind. An hour later, my personal email chimed. The sender was listed as a friend. My heart pounded as I opened the attachment. It was a copy of a bank transfer authorization for $500,000. The signature at the bottom looked exactly like mine. But I'd never signed this document. I'd never even seen it before. The transfer was dated last Tuesday, a day I'd called in sick with the flu. I had been home in bed, not in the office signing million-dollar transfers. I screenshotted the document and compared it to my real signature on old emails. They were identical. Someone had either practiced copying my signature perfectly, or they had digital access to recreate it. The transfer was going to an account I'd never heard of. The receiving bank was in the Cayman Islands. This wasn't just petty theft. This was sophisticated financial crime. And someone had worked very hard to make it look like I was responsible. My phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Calvin?" a man's voice asked. When I confirmed, he said, "FBI Special Agent McCarty. We need to talk." I met Agent McCarty at a small diner outside town. He was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a coffee-stained tie. He slid a folder across the table and said, "We know you didn't do this." Relief flooded through me. "Then why is there a warrant for my arrest?" "Because someone wants us to think you did." He opened the folder, revealing dozens of documents with my forged signature. This operation is too sophisticated for someone in your position. You're being framed. Agent McCarty explained that the FBI had been tracking the money for months. The scheme involved fake vendors, shell companies, and complex money transfers. Someone with high-level access was stealing millions from multiple companies. The person running this needs a fall guy, he said. Someone trustworthy with access to the payment systems. You fit perfectly. I thought about Miguel's warning. How did my janitor know before you did? Agent McCarty smiled grimly. Night shift workers see everything. They clean offices after hours, empty trash cans, overhear conversations. Your janitor probably knows more about what happens in that building than anyone. He leaned forward. We need your help to catch the real criminals. But first, we need to keep you safe. Agent McCarty drove me to a safe house, a modest apartment across town. Stay here until we can figure out who's behind this, he said. Don't contact anyone from work. Don't use your credit cards. Don't go anywhere you normally go. I felt like I was in a movie. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was finishing invoices before deadline. Now I was hiding from federal agents and corporate criminals. The safe house had basic furniture and no personal touches. It felt like a temporary prison. Agent McCarty left me with a burner phone and promised to call with updates. I spent the day reviewing everything I remembered about the suspicious vendors. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that someone in management was involved. The fake vendor payments had been approved quickly, without the usual scrutiny. That only happened when someone high up pushed them through. I made a list of executives who had that kind of authority: the CFO, the VP of operations, and the company president. One of them was stealing millions of dollars, and they'd chosen me to take the blame. That evening, the burner phone rang. It was Miguel. I'm glad you listened to my warning, Miguel said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I've been working nights for 15 years. I see things people don't want seen. He told me about late-night meetings in the executive conference room, shredding parties after normal business hours, documents being burned in the parking lot dumpster. They've been planning this for months, he said. Miguel had overheard conversations about finding a suitable candidate to blame. Someone trustworthy enough that investors would believe they could pull off the scheme, but junior enough to sacrifice. My name had come up repeatedly. They have a whole file on you, Miguel continued. Your work patterns, your personal habits, your financial situation. They know you live alone and don't have family nearby. They know you're honest and wouldn't run, which made you perfect. The planning was chilling. These weren't crimes of opportunity, they were calculated attacks. Someone had studied my life like a blueprint, figuring out exactly how to destroy it. Who's behind it? I asked. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. I think it's the CFO, Mr. Aaron, but he's not working alone. I called Agent McCarty and shared what Miguel had told me. He was interested but cautious. We need evidence, not just witness testimony, he said. Can your janitor friend get us documents? The next morning, Miguel texted the burner phone. Check your email. I found a message with no sender name and a single attachment. It was a photo of a whiteboard covered in financial projections. At the top, someone had written Project Clean Slate, and below it, Target A. Connor. My blood ran cold. Connor was my last name. Project Clean Slate was their code name for framing me. The whiteboard showed a timeline spanning 6 months. Phase 1 had been setting up fake vendors. Phase 2 was creating the forged documents with my signature. Phase 3, scheduled for this week, was asset recovery and target elimination. I showed the photo to Agent McCarty. His expression darkened. Asset recovery means they're planning to steal more money before this falls apart. Target elimination. He paused. That could mean they plan to silence you permanently. My hands started shaking. These people weren't just stealing money, they were willing to hurt me to protect their secret. Agent McCarty made a phone call, then turned back to me. We're moving you to a more secure location, tonight. The new safe house was in a different state. Agent McCarty explained that local corruption might run deeper than they'd realized. If the CFO is involved, he probably has connections in law enforcement, he said. We can't trust anyone. I felt isolated and helpless. My normal life had vanished overnight. I couldn't contact friends or family. I couldn't go to work or even check my regular email. I was completely dependent on the FBI for protection and information. But Agent McCarty brought encouraging news. The forensic accountants had found irregularities in dozens of vendor payments over the past year. The total theft was approaching $10 million. This is much bigger than we initially thought, he said. They'd also discovered that my digital signature had been copied months ago during a routine software update. Someone with administrative access had extracted my signature file and used it to authorize fraudulent payments. The good news is, we can prove the signatures are digital copies, not originals, Agent McCarty explained. The bad news is, whoever did this had high-level access to our systems. That narrowed the suspect list significantly. Only 3 people had that kind of access: the CFO, the IT director, and the company president. Miguel continued feeding us information through encrypted messages. He'd taken photos of documents left in trash cans and recorded conversations through thin office walls. Each piece of evidence pointed toward a conspiracy involving multiple executives. The latest revelation was shocking. They planned to blame not just me, but several other employees. A maintenance worker named Carlos would be accused of providing building access. A data analyst named Patricia would be framed for computer fraud. An accountant named Frank would be charged with money laundering. They're creating an entire criminal organization, Agent McCarty said, with you as the ringleader. The scope was breathtaking. These people had spent months creating fake evidence, forged documents, and manufactured communications to support their story. When the investigation began, every piece of evidence would point to us, not them. But they'd made one mistake. They underestimated Miguel. The invisible janitor who cleaned their offices and emptied their trash had been documenting everything. His photos and recordings were building a case that could expose the real criminals. Miguel's latest message included a crucial detail. Big meeting tomorrow night. All the players will be there. Conference room C, 9 p.m. Agent McCarty smiled grimly. Time to set a trap. The FBI spent the day preparing surveillance equipment and coordinating with federal prosecutors. Agent McCarty explained their plan. Miguel would plant recording devices in conference room C before the meeting. The FBI would monitor from a van outside the building. If they discuss the frame-up or reveal how they accessed your signature, we'll have them, Agent McCarty said. But this is dangerous for Miguel, if they discover he's been helping us. I felt sick thinking about the risk Miguel was taking. He was already working a dangerous job for minimal pay. Now he was risking his safety to help me, someone he barely knew beyond casual workplace greetings. That evening, Miguel sent a simple message: devices planted. They never see the night janitor. At 8:45 p.m., Agent McCarty and I sat in the surveillance van watching our building's parking lot. Expensive cars began arriving. The CFO's BMW, the president's Mercedes, the IT director's Tesla. One by one, the conspirators gathered to plan my destruction. Agent McCarty handed me headphones. You might want to hear this yourself. At exactly 9 p.m., voices filled our ears. I recognized the CFO's voice immediately. Tomorrow we trigger the final phase. The FBI will arrest Connor and the others. By Monday, this will all be over. The conversation was devastating and vindicating at the same time. The executives discussed their crime in detail, congratulating themselves on their clever plan. The CFO, whose name was Aaron, seemed to be the leader. Connor was perfect, Aaron said. Honest reputation, financial access, no family support system. The FBI will believe she masterminded everything. The IT director, a woman named Walsh, described how she'd copied my digital signature during a fake software update. I told Connor it was routine maintenance. She gave me her password without question. The company president, who they called Chief, worried about loose ends. What about the janitor? He's been around a long time. Might notice things. Miguel? Aaron laughed. He barely speaks English. Even if he saw something, who would believe him? I clenched my fists. Miguel spoke perfect English and had probably forgotten more about business than Aaron would ever know. Their casual racism made their other crimes even more disgusting. Agent McCarty was recording everything, building an airtight case, but the conversation was about to take a dark turn. What if Connor doesn't cooperate? Walsh asked. What if she tries to prove her innocence? The room went quiet for a moment. Then Aaron's voice, cold and calculating, We have plans for that scenario too. The implications of Aaron's words hung in the air like a threat. Agent McCarty immediately called for additional protective detail. They're talking about eliminating witnesses, he said. We need to move fast. The executives continued their meeting, discussing how to transfer the remaining stolen money before the investigation closed. They planned to blame their crimes on a fictional network of employees, with me as the mastermind who had recruited the others. The beauty of this plan, Aaron explained, is that it's partly true. Connor did process the payments. She did have access to the systems. The FBI will find her digital signature on everything. What they didn't know was that Miguel had also planted a small camera. The FBI could now see their faces as they planned their crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. But then Walsh raised a disturbing point. Someone leaked information to Connor. She disappeared right before the raids. That's not a coincidence. My blood went cold. They suspected an informant but didn't know who. If they discovered Miguel's role, they might hurt him before the FBI could make arrests. Aaron's voice turned menacing. Find the leak. Find Connor, and make sure neither of them can testify. Agent McCarty immediately radioed for backup units. The situation had escalated from fraud to potential violence. The meeting broke up at 10:30 p.m. Agent McCarty coordinated with SWAT teams positioned around the city. We arrest them all simultaneously, he explained. Aaron at his house, Walsh at her apartment, the president at his office. No chance for them to communicate or destroy evidence. Miguel slipped out of the building and met us at a predetermined location. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were determined. Did you get what you needed? He asked. More than enough, Agent McCarty replied. You've helped us solve a major financial crime. These people will go to prison for a long time. Miguel nodded quietly. I realized this humble man had risked everything to help me. Someone he'd only known as a face in the elevator. His courage had saved my life and possibly prevented other innocent people from being framed. At midnight, Agent McCarty received confirmation. All 3 conspirators were in custody. Aaron had tried to flee to his private plane, but was arrested at the airport. Walsh was caught deleting files from her home computer. The president surrendered without incident, apparently believing his lawyers could fix everything. It's over, Agent McCarty told me. You can go home. But as we drove through the dark streets, I realized my old life was gone forever. Even though I was innocent, my reputation was damaged. The company would probably close. Everyone would remember me as the person accused of stealing millions. The news broke the next morning. Major embezzlement ring exposed at local company. My name appeared in the articles, but this time as a victim, not a suspect. The FBI had released a statement explaining that I'd been framed by corrupt executives. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, buzzed with messages from friends and coworkers. Carla called crying. I knew you didn't do it. I never doubted you for a second. But mixed in with the support were suspicious questions and veiled accusations. Some people still wondered if I'd been involved. The stigma of being investigated would follow me for years. Agent McCarty visited me at the safe house one last time. The grand jury will likely indict all 3 conspirators, he said. You'll need to testify, but your testimony isn't crucial. The recordings and documents speak for themselves. He handed me a check from the FBI's Witness Protection Fund, enough money to start over somewhere else if I wanted. You're free to go wherever you choose, he said. But be careful. Aaron has connections and family money. He might try to retaliate. I thought about Miguel, who was also receiving death threats from unknown callers. We'd both done the right thing, but we were still paying a price. What happens to the company? I asked. Agent McCarty shrugged. Probably bankruptcy. The theft was too extensive to recover from. 3 weeks later, I sat in a courthouse waiting to testify. Aaron, Walsh, and the president, whose name was Gordon, sat at separate defense tables with expensive lawyers. They avoided eye contact with me and each other. The prosecution played the recordings from Conference Room C. Aaron's voice filled the courtroom. Connor was perfect. The FBI will believe she masterminded everything. The jury looked disgusted. When I took the stand, the prosecutor asked simple questions about my job duties and the suspicious vendor payments. I explained how I'd noticed irregularities but hadn't realized their significance until Miguel warned me. Aaron's lawyer tried to suggest I'd been a willing participant who turned on my co-conspirators to save myself. But the timeline didn't support that theory. The FBI had evidence showing I'd been homesick when many crucial documents were signed. Miguel testified with quiet dignity, describing what he'd observed during his 15 years as a night janitor. His English was perfect, his memory was detailed, and his honesty was obvious. When Aaron's lawyer tried to attack his credibility, Miguel simply said, "I saw what I saw." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts for all 3 defendants. Aaron received 25 years in federal prison. Walsh got 15 years. Gordon received 10 years and agreed to cooperate with investigators tracking stolen money in offshore accounts. After the trial, I had to rebuild my life from scratch. The company had indeed gone bankrupt, leaving hundreds of employees without jobs. Some blamed me for the collapse, reasoning that if I hadn't been investigated, the fraud might never have been exposed. That logic was backwards, but grief isn't always logical. People needed someone to blame, and I was available. I moved to a different city and took a job with a nonprofit organization. The work paid less than my corporate job, but it felt meaningful. I helped small businesses secure microloans to grow their operations. Every loan I processed went to real people starting real businesses. Miguel had also left town. The stress of the investigation and trial had been too much for his family. His wife worried about retaliation from Aaron's associates. Before leaving, Miguel stopped by my apartment to say goodbye. "I'm proud of what we did," he said. "Those people thought they could steal millions and blame honest workers. They were wrong." I thanked him for his courage, but he waved off my gratitude. "My daughter starts college next year," he said. "I want her to live in a world where hard work matters more than corruption." 6 months later, I received a postcard from Miguel. His daughter had been accepted to law school with a full scholarship. She wanted to prosecute white-collar criminals. A year after the trial, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell our story. She was particularly interested in Miguel's role, how a night janitor had exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud that law enforcement had missed. "Your story shows that ordinary people can fight back against corruption," she said. "Miguel risked everything to help you, and you both refused to let criminals destroy innocent lives." I agreed to participate, but only if Miguel and the other framed employees could share in any profits. The filmmaker agreed, and we spent weeks recording interviews and reviewing evidence. The documentary, titled The Night Shift Witness, premiered at a film festival and was later sold to a streaming service. It won several awards and sparked discussions about corporate fraud and worker protection. Miguel's portion of the proceeds helped pay for his daughter's law school tuition. The maintenance worker Carlos used his share to start a cleaning business. Patricia, the data analyst, invested in cybersecurity training and became a consultant, helping small businesses protect their data. We'd all found ways to turn our trauma into positive action. But the story wasn't completely over. 2 years after the convictions, Aaron's appeal was denied by the federal court. His lawyers had argued that the FBI surveillance violated his privacy rights, but the judges disagreed. The recordings from Conference Room C were legally obtained and clearly showed premeditated criminal conspiracy. Aaron would serve his full sentence without possibility of early parole. Agent McCarty called to share the news. "Justice isn't always perfect," he said. "But sometimes it works exactly like it should." I'd stayed in touch with McCarty throughout the appeals process. He'd moved to the white-collar crime division and was investigating similar cases across the country. Our case had become a model for exposing corporate fraud through employee witnesses. "You and Miguel proved that criminals can't hide behind expensive suits and corner offices," McCarty said. "Ordinary people with courage can expose extraordinary crimes." The FBI had also implemented new procedures for protecting witnesses in corporate fraud cases. Future victims would receive better support and security than I had experienced. My new life had stabilized into something peaceful. I lived in a small house with a garden where I grew vegetables. My work at the nonprofit was rewarding, and I'd made genuine friends who knew my story but didn't define me by it. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if Miguel hadn't handed me that note in the elevator. Would I have walked into the FBI raid? Would I be in prison now, serving time for crimes I didn't commit? On the 3rd anniversary of Miguel's warning, I drove back to my old city. The office building where I'd worked had been converted to condominiums. A small plaque by the entrance honored Miguel as a citizen whose courage exposed corruption and protected innocent workers. I visited Miguel's old neighborhood and learned that his family had prospered. His daughter was now a prosecutor specializing in financial crimes, just as she'd planned. His son had graduated from high school with honors and received a scholarship to study engineering. Miguel himself had started a small business providing cleaning services to law firms and accounting offices. His experience with corporate fraud made him particularly valuable to companies wanting to prevent employee theft. "He knows what to look for," one of his clients told me. "Miguel can spot suspicious behavior before it becomes criminal activity." That afternoon, I met Miguel for coffee at a small cafe near his office. He looked the same: quiet, observant, decent. We talked about our families, our work, and our shared experience of exposing corruption. "Do you ever regret getting involved?" I asked. Miguel thought for a moment. "No," he said. "My father taught me that good people must stand up to bad people, even when it's dangerous. If we don't, who will?" As we parted ways, Miguel handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo of his daughter in her prosecutor's robes, taken at her swearing-in ceremony. On the back she'd written, "Thank you for showing me that justice is possible." That evening, I sat in my hotel room reading news articles about recent corporate fraud cases. Several mentioned our case as an example of how whistleblowers and unlikely witnesses could expose massive corruption. Miguel's name appeared in academic papers about employee surveillance and corporate accountability. We'd become a case study in criminal justice courses and business ethics seminars. Students learned about the importance of protecting witnesses and the value of careful investigation over quick arrests. But we'd also sparked backlash from corporate defense lawyers who argued that the FBI had relied too heavily on unreliable witnesses like janitors and maintenance workers. They claimed that surveillance recordings violated executive privacy and that disgruntled employees couldn't be trusted. These arguments revealed their creators' biases more than any flaws in our case. The idea that a janitor couldn't be a credible witness showed how little they understood about who really knows what happens in corporate offices. I thought about all the night shift workers, maintenance staff, and support employees who clean offices, fix equipment, and observe behavior after executives go home. They see everything because they're invisible to people who matter. Miguel had proved that invisible doesn't mean powerless. The next morning, I visited the federal courthouse where our trial had taken place. In the lobby was a display about landmark fraud cases, including ours. A photo showed Miguel and me leaving the courthouse after the verdict was announced. The caption read, "Citizen witnesses Miguel Santos and Calvin Connor helped expose a $10 million embezzlement scheme at their former employer. Their courage led to convictions of 3 executives and recovery of millions in stolen funds." A security guard recognized me from the photo. "You're the one who caught those crooks," he said. "My wife used to work for that company. You saved a lot of people's retirement funds." I hadn't thought about the broader impact of our actions. The stolen money had come from employee pension funds and company profits that should have supported worker benefits. By stopping the theft, we'd protected hundreds of families from financial disaster. Walking through the courthouse halls, I remembered how terrified I'd been during the investigation. The uncertainty, the fear, the isolation had almost broken my spirit. But Miguel's quiet courage had sustained me through the darkest moments. His simple note, "Don't come to work tomorrow. Run," had saved not just my life, but my faith in justice and human decency. On my last day in the city, I drove to the cemetery where Agent McCarty had been buried 6 months earlier. He died of a heart attack at age 45, probably brought on by years of stress investigating financial crimes. His funeral had been attended by dozens of people whose lives he'd saved by exposing fraud and corruption. His gravestone was simple: Special Agent Peyton McCarty. He stood with the innocent against the powerful. I left flowers and a note, thanking him for believing in my innocence when the evidence seemed to prove my guilt. His careful investigation and protection had given me the chance to tell my story and help convict the real criminals. From the cemetery, I drove to the airport for my flight home. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the city where my old life had been destroyed and my new life had been born. Miguel's warning had forced me to abandon everything I'd known: my job, my apartment, my daily routine, my sense of security. But it had also freed me from a life I'd been living without examining. My new work felt more meaningful than processing invoices had ever been. My relationships were deeper because they were built on honesty rather than convenience. My courage had grown from facing real danger and discovering I could survive it. The girl who had meekly processed payments without asking questions was gone. In her place was a woman who asked hard questions and stood up for truth, even when it was dangerous. 6 months later, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a congressional staffer working on legislation to protect corporate whistleblowers. They wanted me to testify before a House subcommittee about my experience being framed for embezzlement. "Your case shows how criminals target innocent employees to cover their crimes," the staffer explained. "Congress needs to hear directly from victims about how these schemes work." I agreed to testify, despite my preference for privacy. If my story could help protect other workers from being framed for crimes they didn't commit, the discomfort would be worthwhile. The hearing was held in a packed committee room with cameras and reporters present. I told my story simply: how I'd noticed irregularities in vendor payments, how Miguel had warned me to run, how federal agents had initially suspected me before discovering I was being framed. Committee members asked detailed questions about the forged signatures, the fake vendor schemes, and the psychological pressure of being investigated for crimes I hadn't committed. One representative asked, "What would have happened if your janitor hadn't warned you?" I thought for a moment. I would have been arrested at work in front of my colleagues. The evidence against me was overwhelming. Without Miguel's courage and Agent McCarty's careful investigation, I would probably be in prison right now. The legislation passed 6 months later. The Corporate Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act strengthened legal protections for employees who report financial crimes and created new penalties for executives who retaliate against witnesses. Miguel was invited to the signing ceremony at the White House. He brought his daughter, now a federal prosecutor, and his son, who was studying computer forensics to help investigate digital fraud. During the ceremony, the president spoke about ordinary citizens who show extraordinary courage in fighting corruption. Miguel Santos saw injustice and chose to act despite personal risk, the president said. His example reminds us that democracy depends on citizens who refuse to stay silent when they witness wrongdoing. After the ceremony, Miguel and I walked through the White House gardens. "Did you ever imagine this would happen when you handed me that note?" I asked. Miguel smiled. "I just wanted to help a good person avoid trouble. I never imagined it would change laws or inspire other people to speak up." But that's exactly what had happened. Our case had encouraged other whistleblowers to come forward, leading to dozens of fraud investigations and hundreds of millions in recovered funds. Companies had strengthened their internal controls, knowing that employees were watching and willing to report suspicious activity. As we prepared to leave Washington, Miguel handed me another note. This one read, "Thank you for having the courage to fight back. You saved more than just yourself." I smiled, remembering that first terrifying note in the elevator that had started this journey. Sometimes, the most important moments in our lives begin with a simple act of human kindness from an unexpected source. Miguel's warning had saved my life, but our fight for justice had saved something even more important: our faith that truth could triumph over corruption and that ordinary people could defeat powerful criminals who thought they were untouchable. The